Welcome back to Ancient Echoes, where the ruins of empires still whisper and history doesn't repeat, but it sure knows how to remix. I'm Chelsea, and in this episode we step into the world of Rome, a city that began as a small settlement along the Tiber River and eventually ruled over more than 50 million people, stretched across 3 continents, and became one of the most influential civilizations in the world. Rome gave us aqueducts, concrete, the calendar, senators, sanitation, and sadly the overuse of Latin in academic settings. It also gave us the phrase et tu Brute, which, let's be honest, is still the most dramatic way to tell someone you're mad at them. But Rome didn't start as an empire. It started as a myth, built on fratricide, wolves, and destiny. And it didn't fall all at once. It fell in stages, crumbling under its own ambition, politics, corruption, and the occasional barbarian at the gate. In this episode, we'll trace Rome's path from legendary origins to monarchy, revolution to republic, glory to empire, and finally, from empire to ruin. We'll meet legendary figures like Julius Caesar, Augustus, and Constantine, as well as a few emperors whose names are best remembered as a cautionary tale. More importantly, we'll ask what Rome's rise and fall says about power, governance, and how empires handle success, pressure, and decline. Spoiler, it's not always graceful. Let's begin where the Romans began, not with logic or law, but with a story, a pair of twins, a wolf, and a murder that started it all. Before Rome was an empire, before the marble temples, the emperors, the roads, and the ruins, there was a myth. And like any good myth, it involves twins, a murder, and questionable parenting choices. According to legend, Rome began in 753 BC, when Romulus founded the city after killing his twin brother Remus in a dispute over where exactly to build the city. Because nothing says healthy civic foundation like fratricide. The twins were said to be the sons of Mars, the god of war, and Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, which means they were destined for both greatness and trauma. Abandoned at birth, they were rescued by a she-wolf who nursed them in a cave. Yes, this is the part students always ask about, and eventually raised by a shepherd. When they grew up, they overthrew the corrupt king who had usurped their grandfather's throne, and Romulus went on to found Rome. He then proceeded to populate his city by inviting outlaws, exiles, and fugitives, and staging a charming little event known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, in which Roman men kidnapped women from neighboring tribes to become their wives. So, not exactly a Disney origin story. But this messy mythology gave Romans something more than facts. It gave them a sense of destiny, a belief that their city was born of divine will, forged in hardship, and destined to rule. Historically speaking, Rome was initially a monarchy, ruled by a series of 7 kings from around 753 to 509 BC. Some were native Latins, others were Etruscans, a powerful, mysterious culture from northern Italy that greatly influenced early Roman religion, architecture, and even political structure. A few of these kings were remembered fondly, such as Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, was credited with establishing Rome's religious practices and the calendar. You also have Tullus Hostilius and Ancus Macarius, who expanded Rome's territory through military conquest and colonization. But the kingship didn't exactly end on a high note. The last thing, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or also known as Tarquin the Proud, which is never a good sign, ruled with violence, arrogance, and a very loose definition of public service. His downfall came after his son, Sextus Tarquinius, assaulted a noblewoman named Lucretia, a story that rocked Roman society. Lucretia's subsequent suicide sparked public outrage, and a group of nobles, including Lucius Junius Brutus, led a rebellion to overthrow the monarchy. What came next was radical. The Romans decided no more kings. Instead, they established a new system, one built on elected officials, checks and balances, and a deep suspicion of centralized power. Thus, the Roman Republic was born. A system that would last nearly 500 years, and it all began with a founding trauma and a vow that never again should one man hold too much power. Of course, by the time we get to Julius Caesar, they'll have forgotten all about that, but hold on, we're not quite there yet. So what do we take from Rome's early history? That it was shaped by both myth and memory, that its political identity was born not just of ambition, but of resistance, and that the seeds of future greatness were planted alongside the seeds of future collapse. A city built on the bones of a brother, a republic born from the fall of a king. Next, we'll explore how this new republic worked, who had the power, who didn't, and how politics in Rome became both brilliant and occasionally murderous. So the Romans kicked out their kings and swore off monarchy forever. And then they said, let's build a government that's complicated, elitist, and fueled entirely by ambition. Enter the Roman Republic. Founded in 509 BC, the Roman Republic was a groundbreaking political system, at least for its time. Power was no longer held by a single ruler. Instead, it was distributed among various elected officials and institutions designed to check each other's authority. At the top were the consuls, 2 of them, elected annually. They were kind of like co-presidents, if our presidents could veto each other, command armies, and only served for a year before retiring to avoid becoming too powerful. Yes, it was confusing. And yes, it still probably worked better than most group projects. However, the consuls were advised by the Senate, a body originally composed of aristocrats or patricians, who claimed descent from Rome's founding families. The Senate wasn't technically a lawmaking body early on, but it held enormous sway, especially over foreign policy, finance, and military decisions. And then there were the popular assemblies, where laws could be passed and magistrates elected, if you were a citizen, that is. Roman society was rigidly divided into 2 main classes: patricians, which were the elite land-holding families, and plebeians, which was everyone else. Plebeians could vote, but early on they had very little political power and they were barred from holding most offices. Naturally, this went over really well. Over time, through a series of peaceful protests, walkouts, and the occasional threat of just not showing up to fight in wars, the plebeians gained more rights. This long struggle, called the Conflict of Orders, led to key reforms, including the creation of the tribunes of the plebes, who could veto unfair laws, the publication of the 12 Tables, which are Rome's first written legal code, and the eventual right for plebeians to hold consulship and marry into patrician families, which was very progressive for the time, or as the Senate called it, deeply upsetting. This tug-of-war between elite control and popular demands became one of the defining features of the Republic, and in many ways its greatest strength and its fatal flaw. To rise in Roman politics, you needed more than ideas. You needed family connections, military success, public support, and preferably a victory parade or 2. The Roman system was built around what historians called the cursus honorum, or the courses of honors, a structured political ladder that ambitious young men were expected to climb. You started in lower offices and worked your way up to consul, and maybe even censor, the prestigious and nosy official who kept track of public morality and property assessments. And of course, all this campaigning cost money, so politics became entangled with bribery, backroom deals, and outright violence. Basically, imagine if running for office required both a military campaign and a literal campaign, with the speeches, mudslinging, and then add in the actual swords. Despite its messiness, the Republic inspired deep loyalty among Romans. The system was built on mos maiorum, which is the way of the ancestors, a guiding principle that emphasized tradition, duty, and the respect for Rome's institutions. The ideal Roman was expected to put the state above self, to serve in both war and politics, and to uphold the values of discipline, courage, and self-sacrifice. And yet, for all its noble ideals, the Republic had structural weaknesses like a deepening wealth gap, frequent military conflicts abroad, factionalism at home, and a growing dependence on charismatic military leaders, which, as we'll see, is kind of like giving a general a fan club, an army, and zero oversight, and then acting surprised when things go sideways. So the Republic rose, not through perfection, but through adaptability. It was a living system, always negotiating the line between aristocracy, populism, power, and responsibility. But it also planted the seeds of its own undoing. Next, we'll watch those seeds take root as the Republic begins to fracture, and a man named Julius Caesar decides that maybe one council just isn't enough. The Roman Republic was built on a fear of kings, and yet, as history likes to remind us, systems meant to prevent tyranny often end up creating the perfect conditions for it. Because if there's one thing more dangerous than a monarch, it's a very popular man who insists he's not one. And so we come to Julius Caesar, general, populist, reformer, and cautionary tale. By the 1st century BC, the Republic wasn't looking great. Its economy was tilted wildly in favor of the elite. Its soldiers, often recruited from the poor, were loyal more to their generals than to the Senate, and political discourse had become less about persuasion and more about swords in the street. Into this power vacuum stepped Gaius Julius Caesar. He had everything Rome loved: aristocratic lineage, military brilliance, and the rhetoric skill to move both the mob and the Senate, sometimes in opposite directions at once. He conquered Gaul, or modern-day France, with brutal efficiency, earning wealth, fame, and a fiercely loyal army. He wrote accounts of his campaigns in the third person, which is either a stroke of literary genius or a clear sign of future personality cults. Caesar defeated the Gauls. It's both true and, frankly, excellent PR. But his real victory was political. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, literally and metaphorically, bringing his army into Italy in direct defiance of the Senate. It was an act of war, civil war to be precise, and he won. After defeating his rivals, most famously Pompey the Great, his former ally turned enemy, Caesar returned to Rome and was appointed dictator, not just for a year, not even for 10 years, but eventually dictator for life. This made some people nervous. Caesar implemented sweeping reforms like land redistribution, debt relief, calendar reform, yes, our calendar, and even opened Senate seats to non-Italians. He was popular with the people, resented by the Senate, and dangerously close to being called king. And in Rome, king was a little less a title and more like a social death sentence. Now, on the Ides of March in 44 BC, a group of senators, including his friend Brutus, stabbed him 23 times in the Senate. They claimed to be defending the Republic. Instead, they ended it. Enter Octavian, or soon-to-be Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir. Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, was 18 years old, politically inexperienced, and wildly underestimated, which in Roman politics was just the camouflage he needed. Over the next decade, Octavian played the long game. He allied with Mark Antony, defeated Caesar's assassins, turned on Antony, defeated him too, and cleverly framed himself not as a king, but as Principate, or first citizen. In 27 BC, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, and the Roman Empire was officially born. Not with a coronation, but with a carefully choreographed performance of humility, which is very Roman. Augustus maintained the illusion of republican tradition, elections, Senate sessions, laws, but make no mistake, power was now consolidated in one man. The Republic was dead. Long live the Empire. So what changed? Not everything. Rome still had a Senate, still had laws, but decisions flowed from the emperor downward. The days of public debate had given way to imperial decree. And yet Augustus was remarkably effective. He ushered in a period of relative peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, that would last for 2 centuries. He skillfully used art, literature, architecture, and religion to legitimize his rule, because nothing says, "I'm totally not a monarch," like marble statues of yourself in every city. The shift from republic to empire wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a slow, strategic unraveling, driven by ambition, inequality, military loyalty, and a political system that just couldn't adapt fast enough. Rome didn't lose its freedom in a single moment. It handed it over, piece by piece, to a man who said all the right things and built a world where no one else could speak. Next, we'll see what Augustus built and what his successors did with it. From golden ages to flaming disasters, the early Roman Empire was anything but boring. With Augustus, the Roman Empire took its first breath, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like the world might stay in balance. Augustus ruled for over 40 years, transforming the state, stabilizing the economy, professionalizing the army, and creating a propaganda machine that would make a modern PR firm blush. He wasn't just an emperor, he was the father of the country, the high priest, the moral reformer, and perhaps most importantly, the man who died peacefully in bed, which was a rare feat for Roman emperors who tended to exit the stage via dagger, poison, or very suspicious illness. But Augustus's legacy was more than just personal success. He created a system where one man held all the real power, wrapped in republican window dressings. And once that system was in place, well, it had to be filled. The first dynasty after Augustus was the Julio-Claudians, a family tree best described as brilliant, broken, and genetically bold. You had Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, who was a competent administrator and a deeply paranoid recluse who ended his reign exiling senators and communing with astrologers on the island of Capri. Then you have Caligula, began his reign with promise, young, charismatic, adored by the people. Then he got sick, and everything changed. He executed rivals, bankrupted the treasury, declared himself a living god, and allegedly tried to make his horse a consul, which may have been satire or a shrewd political commentary on the Senate's usefulness. A horse was at least unlikely to filibuster. Claudius came next, an awkward, stammering scholar no one took seriously until he outlived everyone else. He expanded the empire into Britain and reformed the bureaucracy, all while being manipulated by an ambitious wife and then poisoned by his next one. And then there was Nero. Nero. Actor, musician, architect of his own reputation. He's most famous, of course, for allegedly fiddling while Rome burned, though historically, he was probably out of town, and fiddles hadn't yet been invented. But accuracy aside, Nero's legacy included persecution of Christians, public executions, lavish building projects, and the general vibe of someone who took being emperor as performance art. He died by suicide in 68 AD, declaring, "What an artist dies in me," which, to be fair, is one of the most dramatically Roman exit lines in history. After Nero's death, Rome descended into chaos. In 69 AD, 4 men claimed the throne in rapid succession, an imperial version of speed dating, but with civil wars. Eventually, Vespasian emerged as emperor and founded the Flavian dynasty, known for rebuilding after Nero's excesses and constructing the Colosseum, a gift to the people funded notably by the spoils of war in Judea. His son, Titus, opened the Colosseum with 100 days of games, while also managing disasters like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and a devastating fire in Rome. Then came Domitian, who ruled as an autocrat and insisted on being called Dominus Edus, which is Lord and God, which historically historians typically categorize as a red flag. From chaos rose competence. The 5 good emperors, from Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, they oversaw a period of stability, expansion, and thoughtful governance. Notably, these emperors weren't chosen by bloodline, but adopted for merit. Novel concept, right? You have Trajan. He expanded the empire to its greatest extent. Then you have Hadrian, who consolidated power and built walls, notably the one in Britain that now serves as an excellent photo op. You have Antonius Pius, who presided over a peaceful and a prosperous reign. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor who fought constant wars while writing Stoic meditations in his tent. So yes, the emperor of Rome was journaling his thoughts on virtue and morality between battles. Take that, self-help influencers. But even golden ages have shadows. Marcus Aurelius broke tradition and passed the throne to his biological son, Commodus, a man more interested in gladiator games than governing. Rome had reached its peak and then handed the wheel to someone who thought he was Hercules. Literally. So what do we learn from the emperors between Augustus and Aurelius? That Rome could thrive under strong principled leadership, but it rarely got it. That even the most powerful empire in the world could hinge on the temperament of a single man, and that the line between statesmanship and spectacle was often razor thin. Next, we'll follow the empire into its long twilight, through crisis, division, and transformation, and ask what truly brought Rome to its knees. Every empire likes to imagine itself eternal, but Rome, despite its marble monuments, grand narratives, and nearly a millennium of existence, was no exception to the rule that everything built must eventually break. The fall didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a singular catastrophe. It was a long process, complicated and occasionally bureaucratic, because leave it to the Romans to even decline with administrative complexity. The unraveling began in earnest in the 3rd century AD, a period historians refer to helpfully and ominously as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had over 26 emperors, and almost all of them met untimely, unusually violent ends. Assassination became the preferred method of career change. The empire was fractured by civil wars, economic collapse, plagues, and barbarian invasions, and the kind of general instability that makes you long for a return to Nero, who at least had a theme song. Meanwhile, emperors desperately debased the currency to pay the troops, triggering inflation so bad it made the Roman coins about as useful as a handshake from Caligula. Then came Diocletian, a career soldier who didn't fix the crisis so much as organize it more efficiently. He split the empire into east and west, with co-emperors in each region, and created the Tetrarchy, a 4-man ruling system designed to prevent civil war. It worked for a time, but Rome, being Rome, the moment someone in power died or sneezed incorrectly, it devolved into civil war anyway. Still, Diocletian's reforms stabilized the empire temporarily and laid the groundwork for what would come next. Enter Constantine the Great, a name you probably remember because he did 2 very big things. He reunited the empire under a single ruler, and he converted to Christianity. After allegedly seeing a vision before battle, a cross in the sky with the words "In hoc signo vinces," or "In this sign conquer," Constantine adopted the Christian faith and issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. Later, he called the Council of Nicaea to help define Christian orthodoxy and move the capital of the empire to Byzantium, renamed Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. And yes, that's going to get stuck in your head now. Christianity transformed Rome from within, reshaping its identity, rituals, and eventually its very idea of power. No longer centered around Jupiter and Mars, Rome became the seat of the Christian world. It didn't happen all at once, but when it did, it stuck. While the Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, would continue for another 1,000 years, the western half staggered towards collapse. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, Germanic tribes were pushing at the borders, the army was stretched thin and often composed of foreign mercenaries, the economy was in freefall, and internal politics made modern election cycles look tame. In 410 AD, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric, a shock so profound it reverberated throughout the ancient world. The final emperor of the West, Romulus Augustus, a name that sounds like a failed attempt at rebranding, was deposed in 476 AD by a Germanic chieftain named Augustus. And with that, the Western Roman Empire collapsed, not in fire and fury, but in exhaustion. So why did Rome fall? The short answer is slowly, unevenly, and for 1,000 interlocking reasons, like political corruption, economic decay, military overreach, cultural transformation, and the simple truth that no empire can expand forever. Rome didn't fall because of one bad emperor or one bad battle. It fell because it was too big, too brittle, and too unwilling to adapt until it was too late. Lastly, let's consider the real legacy of Rome, not just in its laws and roads, but in the warnings it left behind, because sometimes the greatest echo of an empire is the silence that follows it. Rome built roads that outlasted its emperors, walls that resisted time, and ideas about law, governance, power that still echo in our institutions today. But for all its strength, Rome was not invincible. It grew too vast, too tangled, too sure of its own eternity. It promised order, then fed on chaos. It feared kings, then made emperors unto gods. And in the end, it didn't do so much as crash as unravel. The kind of slow motion fall you only notice once you're standing in the ruins, wondering where the roof went. Yet, in those ruins, we'll find more than failures. We'll find legacy. In every legal system shaped by Roman law, in every republic that promises shared power, in every cathedral that rose where a temple once stood, and in every debate about how power should be earned and what happens when it's not. Rome reminds us that glory is never guaranteed, and that even the mightiest structures rest on very human foundations: ambition, fear, hope, compromise. And when those foundations crack, the collapse is not a question of if, but when. Thanks for walking the rise and fall of the Roman Empire with me on Ancient Echoes. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a friend who loves history, and be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Next time on Ancient Echoes, we'll shift from politics to poetry once again into the world of Roman art, literature, and legacy, where beauty becomes propaganda and even marble tells a story. Until then, may your foundations be strong, your questions sharp, and your ambitions a little more self-aware than Rome's.